Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Lux. So, today I'm going to be talking about the Amato family murders and the lengths that one member went through to continue living out his fantasies. Grant Amato was born on May 20th of 1989 in Orlando, Florida. His parents, Chad and Margaret, had another son before this that they had named Cody. Margaret also had a son named Jason from her previous marriage that Chad ended up adopting. So altogether, they ended up having 3 boys. Now, Chad was a pharmacist and Margaret was a senior operations manager. So this family did very well for themselves. They had ended up settling down in Cholula, not quite sure, Florida, to raise their children. It was a small town just outside of Orlando. And like I said, this family was doing very well financially between their 2 jobs, which gave them the opportunity to really pursue their interest. Money wasn't really an obstacle for them. Margaret loved horses and had fallen in love with a specific horse that she had named Lady, and she ended up adopting her. She found a stable near her house that she could board her at so that she could go see her anytime she wanted. And this family they had a great life. Later, Jason would say that his dad could be a bit strict and had high expectations of his children. He wanted them all to succeed in life. And this could cause problems, especially when the boys became teenagers. They really butted heads with their dad. But, it's just teenagers being stubborn and pushing their boundaries and seeing what their limits are. They're just learning who they wanted to be. It's said that Cody and Grant were really close. They were really close in age, so they grew up kind of like best friends. And it was just an unbreakable bond. They were only 2 years apart, so they shared a lot of same interest. They attended Timber Creek High together, where they both ended up joining the weightlifting team. And even once they graduated from high school and got older, they still maintained a very close relationship. They both enrolled in nursing classes at the University of Central Florida, and after they both did decide that they wanted to continue their education and become anesthesiologists. So they had big goals and they were wanting to do the same things together, getting through classes and school and just really being a team. And it's just amazing how close their relationship was. It was like they had planned their lives together with the same goals. And they even planned that they would live in their parents' house once their parents moved into a smaller place, which Chad and Margaret had already planned out. They found the home, they purchased this smaller home, and once the kids were all done with school, they had planned to move out and get into this smaller space since it would just be the 2 of them. Now, some might say that they were a little too close to be planning out their entire lives with the expectation that they would be by each other's side the entire time. It didn't really seem like they thought much into, once they had families of their own, what were their plans? It's great to have a close relationship with your siblings and that strong bond, so you know that there's always somebody there for you if you need them, but it seemed very much short-sighted of we're going to do these things together and we're going to live together, and some might say it was a little bit too close and too much planning for it just to be the 2 of them all the time. Now, even though they were close, they did have different personalities and outlooks on life when it came to certain things, and Cody was definitely the more responsible one out of the 2 of them, and he would regularly have to get Grant out of some sort of trouble that he had gotten himself into. In 2010, Grant actually got kicked out of his nursing program, so he began working at Advent Health Orlando as a nurse. And while Cody was able to finish the program, he went to begin his career in anesthesiology. He went on with their original plan, and it was kind of like Grant got left behind in those plans. In June of 2018, the staff at Advent Health noticed that 8 sedative bottles had gone missing. And they did end up finding the bottles, but at that point they were already empty and in 2 patients' rooms that were being overseen by Grant. So it looked very suspicious because the doctors hadn't ordered these medications for these patients. And Grant actually was listed as the person who checked them out. When confronted about it, Grant denied doing anything illegal or trying to harm the patients in any way or try to sell it. He just said that he gave it to the patients that were not relaxed enough, in his opinion. They had suspicion this wasn't the first time he had done this, so they did end up firing him for it. During this, Grant started making statements of wanting to hurt himself, so they did end up having to call the police just to ensure that he and everyone around were safe. And after all of that, Grant was now unemployed. So, to keep himself occupied while he's sitting around the house, he started spending a lot more time online. He would play video games and more frequently would visit porn sites, and he started really getting into watching Twitch streams of video games. He even went on to tell his parents that he wanted to make a career out of streaming himself playing video games on Twitch. His parents were starting to worry about him because once he had lost his job, they noticed that a large amount of money was going missing and being taken out of their bank accounts, which the children had access to, but usually it was a conversation of like, hey, I need a loan or I need this amount of money for a purpose. But that wasn't what Grant was doing. He was just taking the money and not telling them, hoping that they wouldn't notice. And there were also credit card charges to multiple websites that his parents weren't familiar with. They weren't doing it. They had never heard of these websites before. And so they asked him about it, and he admitted to being the one taking the money. But he said it was to promote himself on Twitch. He was trying to get followers. He was trying to build this stream so that he could make money back. This was not the truth, however, because that is not where he was spending the money at all. He was actually using the money to talk to a cam girl named Sylvia Vetsislavova. Sorry, I butchered that one. Who went by the name Sylvie. He was spending a lot of his time on her site, which meant that he had to pay a lot of money. In order to see her or talk to her, he had to deposit money. And he would spend roughly $600 a night to be able to interact with her, to talk to her for 4 hours. He then got to the point where he started sending her gifts, like clothing, sex toys that she could use while she was streaming. And you gotta remember that he wasn't the one paying for all of these. $600 a night, every single night, this was not his money. This was his parents' money. And to him, he felt like he and Sylvie were getting really close since they started texting on the regular, which it seems like he might have forgotten that he was paying her to respond to him. She wasn't doing this because she was getting close with him or feeling like she was in a relationship with him. It was literally her job. You're paying her for a service, she is providing that service, and he thought it was a deeper connection than it was. To Grant, he was falling in love with Sylvie. This was his girlfriend, they were in love, they were, in his mind, going to spend the rest of their lives together. And it was like he blocked out the fact that he wasn't the only one she was talking to. She had all kinds of clients. And there would even be like group sessions where multiple men were watching her, and he just blanked all of that out, I'm guessing, like didn't want to admit that he wasn't her boyfriend, that he wasn't the only one she was talking to. And he started also talking in the chat rooms and telling them that he was a successful streamer and he had all of this money and he was just rich. And he even wrote a letter complaining about his family, saying that they didn't understand how he could care so much about Sylvie. Like, they couldn't comprehend that this was a real relationship, because in reality, only Grant thought this was a real relationship. He did this for months. He was stealing money from his parents, and it even started stealing money from his brother Cody. And he got to the point that if he couldn't get money, he would just steal items from the family, and he would sell them. He ended up getting to about $65,000 loan on the house. He took out collateral on his parents' home in order to pay to talk to a cam girl. And he thought that this was perfectly normal. This was how a relationship worked. He was just so deep into his obsession, his addiction. Around Thanksgiving time of 2018, the family had enough. They were done. At this point, he had stolen $150,000 from his parents and $60,000 from Cody. And they were all they've reached their limit and were cutting him off. They were done. They all decided to sit down and have a very serious conversation about everything that was going on and how they planned to move forward. During this conversation, he did finally admit where the money was going, and he told them about Sylvie. They tried to be very supportive because they realized that he was struggling with an addiction. To spend this amount of money, it wasn't just a little amount of money. Like, this was a lot of money. So the family started going to therapy as a group, and it seemed to be helping them. Grant was opening up more and said that he felt depressed at times, and he could feel like sometimes his family made him feel worthless. And so he was sharing, he was opening up in these sessions, and everybody thought that progress was being made. And in the beginning of December, things were better. Everybody felt it, everybody thought it, and it seemed like Grant was serious about getting his life back on track. Before he had lost his job, he and Cody had planned a trip to Japan. So Cody said, you know what, we should still go. I'll pay for it, but we should still go on this trip. And the trip went great. There were no incidents, nothing crazy happened. And when they got back, Grant started to fall back into his old habits. A few days after being back, Grant and his dad got into a huge fight about money because Grant had told him that he would get a new job, but his dad wasn't seeing this happening. Grant's just sitting around all day in his room, on his computer, online. There was no effort being put into actually finding a new job. Now, just as a reminder at this point, Grant is in his 30s. He's a 30-year-old man living with his parents, stealing all of their money, and doesn't feel ashamed, doesn't feel bad, doesn't feel the need to try to pay them back. And his parents, they just wanted him to get a good job. They wanted him to have a good life. They wanted him to be able to stand on his own 2 feet and support himself. They didn't want him to lounge around the house all day and just steal their money to get by. Grant complained all the time that his dad just nagged him every day that he needed to get a job because in reality, that's what he needed to do. He needed to get a job. He needed to pay his own bills. He needed to start paying back the family all of the money that he had stolen from them. A few days went by, and they got into another fight. And this time, Grant stormed out of the house. He just left, didn't tell anybody where he was going, just disappeared. Now, this worried Cody and Margaret, his mom, because they didn't know if maybe he would hurt himself. They didn't know what state of mind he was in, and they were worried. And when he hadn't come home by the next day, they were getting very, very concerned. So they decided to file a missing persons report. They told the police that Grant had texted saying that he was tired of everything and he was going to handle it in his own way. And that was kind of a concerning sentence because that could mean a lot of things. That could mean that he was done with this life and he was going to hurt himself. Like, they didn't know where he was mentally. A day later, they got a call from a sheriff saying that they had found Grant. Grant ended up telling the officer who found him that he had gotten into a fight with his parents and he just needed a break. So he left to stay with another family member, just to take a breather from the family, the tension, everything. Now, since the missing persons report said that he might harm himself, the officer had some questions he needed to ask just to figure out where Grant was. And Grant informed him that he had no intention of hurting himself. He just needed space from his parents. That was it. Nothing major, just a few days apart. And the officer said Grant didn't fit the criteria of somebody that was going to hurt himself or others, so they let him be on his way. He ended up staying with his Aunt Donna, and she said when he first showed up, he just looked skinny and lost and kind of just slept all day long. She thought that he had come to her for help, but in reality, Grant was just scamming her like he'd done to his parents and his brother. A few days of him being there, she started noticing weird charges on her cards. And they were in large amounts. There wasn't like $20 here. They were big amounts, noticeable amounts. And she reached out to Cody to just talk to him about it because she didn't know what Grant was doing. She didn't know what the family had been going through. She didn't know the troubles and everything. And she explained what was going on to Cody, who was extremely embarrassed and just kept apologizing to her. He begged her not to press charges against Grant and that he would personally pay her back whatever Grant had stolen. He would pay her back. He ended up explaining the situation and that they were trying to get him help. They really were trying to support him through this and get him better without involving the authorities. Chad also ended up talking to her and asked her not to press charges and even broke down crying on the phone. Donna would later say that in all of the years that she had known him, she had never seen him cry once. He also ended up explaining everything that Cody had, but also included the fact that he and Margaret had to refinance their home due to how much money Grant had stolen from them. They were really, their savings, their money was being depleted so quickly that they couldn't keep up. Chad even ended up getting a second job just to cover Grant's debts because they didn't want him to go to jail, but they didn't want to lose their home and everything else. So instead of Grant getting off of his ass and getting a job himself, his father had to go out and get a second job to support him. And it's mind-boggling. I get wanting to support your child. I get wanting to be there and loving them and everything, but at the same time, you have to let them accept the consequences of their actions. And if they had gone through the proper channels to the authorities, maybe a lot of things could have been different. On December 22nd, they ended up having an intervention for Grant at Donna's house. They wanted him to take responsibility for what he was doing and had done for so long to all of them. They told him that it was time for him to go to rehab and get actual help from professionals. He agreed, and he checked himself into a rehab facility in South Florida for his addiction to sex. However, on January 5th of 2019, Grant came home from rehab. He hadn't even been there for 2 weeks. And while he was there, Cody took on the debt of sending him to that rehab, adding on to the debt that he now was trying to pay back to his aunt and the debt of all the money that Grant had stolen from him. Cody was falling into a hole just to protect his brother, hoping that it would really help Grant, just really trying to be a supportive brother that had his back and get him on the right track so that eventually Grant could be the one to start paying everybody back. His dad also decided not to fight the loan that Grant had taken from the mortgage because he didn't want it to raise any red flags. They were really trying to keep police out of this. They did not, under any circumstances, want Grant to go to jail for the things that he was doing. They figured if we could just do this our own way and save him and protect him, he'll have a better chance of getting back on his feet than if he were to go to jail. He'll fall down a hole. He'll lose himself completely. The day Grant returned, the family decided that they would all go out to eat at California Pizza Kitchen just to kind of celebrate everybody being back together and the progress that they thought Grant was making. His dad ended up presenting kind of like a contract to Grant, and it laid out all of the expectations. Grant was told he needed to get a job, he needed to stop using the internet by midnight, and he also needed to start paying his own cell phone bill because he wasn't even doing that. All this money he was stealing and he wasn't even paying his bills. He was just sending every penny to Sylvie. Grant also needed to come up with a payment plan for himself to start paying everyone back, whatever he thought was a reasonable amount that he could be able to pay everybody, slowly making a dent in what he owed. He was also needing to go to therapy regularly, and he needed to apologize to everyone he had stolen from. He needed to take that responsibility and tell everybody he was sorry. He also needed to cut all contact with Sylvie. It was made very clear to Grant that if he didn't do these things that were written down, these expectations were not met, he would be kicked out of the house. He would be cut off. They would be done. This was his last chance. And Grant agreed, and he said, I'll do it. I'll do everything you want. But he never really had a plan to go through with that. He lied. Again. On the morning of January 25th, the sheriff's department got a call from a coworker of Cody's. He was wanting a wellness check done because Cody hadn't shown up for his shift and nobody could get a hold of him. The deputies ended up going to the Amato house and saw that Cody's car was in the driveway and that they could see his parents' cars in the garage, so they knew that they had to be home. They knocked, but nobody responded. They even tried all 3 of their phone numbers trying to see if anybody would answer, but they got no response. They made a bunch of noise outside trying to get some kind of life inside to see if anybody would come out. Anybody was home, some kind of sign of life. After none of this worked, the family decided to... The family. That's not what I meant to say. They finally decided to break into the back door. Once inside, they immediately came across Chad's body in the kitchen. He had been shot twice in the head. Cody was next to be found. He was in a small room just off of the garage, and he was lying on the floor in the fetal position, covered in blood, with a gunshot wound to the face. Margaret was found in her office sitting at her desk with a bullet hole to the back of her head. The house didn't show any signs of this being a robbery, so from the looks of it, it was an execution of this family. Crime scene tech said that all shots were done without hesitation, and that Cody was most likely shot the moment he got home from work, because he hadn't even made it far from the garage into the house before being shot. He still had on his scrubs, and he didn't have a chance to even realize what was happening. Investigators knew that whoever did this had come to the house with the intention of killing this family. They knew that Grant also lived there because the police had been by a few times and knew that there was 4 people that lived in the home. And he wasn't found in the house. There was no sign of him, so they put out a bolo for him immediately. They didn't know yet if he was a suspect or if maybe he was another victim that was kidnapped or taken. So they used his toll transponder to kind of see if they could locate him. And it did show that afternoon him driving the road, but after that they didn't know where he had gone, which kind of eliminated him being kidnapped or taken. He was seen driving his own vehicle around. They ended up talking to Cody's girlfriend Sloan, who told them all about the family problems and the money and what Grant had been putting the family through. And she said lately Cody had been telling her how much Grant's behavior was getting a bit concerning. He actually ended up saying that he was afraid that Grant was going to get to the point where he ended up killing them all. She said the day before the bodies were found that Cody had got a call from his dad saying he needed him to come home because something was wrong. She ended up texting him about a half hour after he left work to ask, what was going on, and he responded and said it was all okay, she didn't need to worry, false alarm, we're good. Their oldest brother, Jason, was also notified of his family's deaths, and he told investigators, he kind of wasn't really close with anyone in the family, and he only really kept in contact with his mom. And they talked about once a week, so he did know what was going on. She kept him informed about Grant's behavior and a little bit of the money situation of everything that was happening. And he told investigators about Grant's relationship with Sylvie, that he was stealing all of this money to give to a cam girl. They were able to locate Grant's car the next day in a hotel parking lot. And the staff there said he had checked in the day before and he was only going to be there for one night. And during this questioning of the staff, trying to see where Grant was, Grant actually walked out of his room and straight, into the line of sight of the investigators. So they didn't have to go searching for him or anything. He agreed to go to the sheriff's office for an interview, and he told them he had started seeing Sylvie about 6 months ago. He told them he had sent her a lot of money, and after everything happened, he did agree to his dad's terms. He said, I would go to rehab, I would do all of these things. Everything was what he was saying. Everything was great. Everything was going to plan. Nothing was bad lately. However, as time went by, he then started thinking that the rules were unfair for him because Sylvie was his girlfriend. He should be able to talk to her. And this was a real relationship. They couldn't make him not see his girlfriend. Grant said his dad found out that he was still talking to Sylvie, and on the 24th they got into a fight about it. He said his dad grabbed him by the shirt and kicked him out of the house, and he was able to grab a few things and he left. But as he was driving away, he ran into Cody, who said that he would go talk to their dad and calm him down and he would just fix everything. And then he said that was the last time he had seen his family or spoken to anybody, which was not true because detectives informed him that Cody was working that night. So how could you have run into him on the road on the way out? Grant then admitted that he lied. He then said he didn't leave right after the fight. Like, he hung around. Even though he just got into this heated fight with his dad, he decided to stick around the house until Cody got home and actually didn't leave until around midnight. He said he slept in his car, and then in the morning he drove back home, but once he pulled into the neighborhood, he wasn't ready, so he turned around and he left again. He was then informed again by detectives, well, that's weird. Did you see anything strange while you were there? And he said, no, it was just quiet when I left. And they were like, so you didn't notice all of the police cars and news vans sitting outside of your house? And he was like, oh, I did lie again. I'm sorry. I did see all those things. And that was why I left, because I didn't want to get involved. You didn't want to get involved. You didn't want to know what was going on at your house. You didn't want to see why all of these police officers and news vans were in front of your home. Like, that didn't make you curious or want to make sure that your family was okay? Nothing? You just said, I don't want to get involved, and left? That's strange. And detectives questioned him, like, why didn't you ask what was going on? Make sure that your family was okay. And he just said, I don't know. I didn't want to get involved, so I left. And then he said that he went to get some food. He used the Wi-Fi to look up what happened to see if he could figure out what was going on with all the police in the neighborhood, and said that he found an article that said that there was a shooting in the neighborhood. But he didn't know it was his house that the shooting happened. He just knew that the neighborhood, somebody was shot. So they then asked him, why didn't you try to contact somebody in the family to make sure that it wasn't them, to make sure that they were okay? And his only response was he didn't want to know. He didn't want to know if something bad happened. And they realized that 3 hours into this investigation and into this conversation that they were having with him, he hadn't actually asked what happened. If it was his whole family, if somebody in his family was hurt, or are they at the hospital, he didn't ask any questions. And detectives at this point were pretty confident that he was involved somehow. He had something to do with this. One of the detectives laid out crime scene photos in front of Grant of Cody in the little room off the garage. And she said, if he had left that night with his brother looking like that, was your brother already dead when you left? And then she did the same thing with Chad and Margaret's photos. Did your parents look like this when you left that night? And he said no. He didn't know what happened. He wasn't there. He didn't know. But he suggested that maybe, if he had to guess, it was a murder-suicide that was committed by Cody. He was now blaming his brother who had just been killed. He blamed him for killing his parents and then taking his own life, which didn't make any sense. There was no evidence. There was no reason. There was nothing behind this theory of his. And detective told him straight out, like, that's not what happened. We could tell if that was what happened, and it's not what happened. Grant then went on to say that he knew it looked like he had all of this motive and all of the means with the money and the expectations his family had of him to get his life together, but he didn't do it. Like, it looked bad, but I'm innocent. He said that he was used to this. He had spent half his life being blamed for everything. Like, he was this bad guy and everybody was out to get him. Still not taking any responsibility for his actions, for the things he'd done to the family, for the money he'd stolen. Detectives felt like they were getting close to a confession, so they decided to have Jason come in and talk to him. And Jason asked him straight out, did you do this? And Grant said no. Jason said he wanted to believe him, he really did, but the last person in the house was you. You had this motive, you took all this money, they wanted you to get better, they wanted you to have a better life, to get on your feet. I want to believe you, but I can't with everything going on. I can't believe you weren't involved in this. And they talked for about 15 minutes, and Grant continued to say, I didn't do it. Meanwhile, crime scene techs were going through the house and Grant's car. And inside of Grant's car was a letter. And in this letter, it kind of broke down everything that had been going on. It was a letter written to Grant saying, like, these are all the things happening, but I'm still here for you. Like, we can get through this. I swear, like, we got this. And when they asked him about this letter, Grant claimed he wrote it to himself, just to kind of keep track of everything that had been happening. why you would write yourself a letter in that way, like a person writing to you, but that's how you choose to keep track of what's going on in your life. I mean, these are pretty major things going on. I don't think you need to write down a letter to yourself to re-explain the bad decisions you've been making and all the money you've been stealing. Back at his hotel room, they ended up finding credit cards that belonged to his family. And they then found more credit cards at the Amato house that had been copied by Grant. So he had copies in his room of everybody's credit cards, including his Aunt Donna's credit cards. And they ended up arresting Grant for 3 counts of premeditated murder. On March 27th of 2019, he had a bond hearing to see if he was eligible for parole, or not parole, but for bail, if he could be out before trial. And his lawyer said, look, you don't have any actual physical evidence that my client did this, and he needs time to prepare for his trial, so he should be allowed on bond. This was denied by the judge. In April, he had another bond hearing, and this time he was given bail for $75,000. While he was in jail, he wasn't allowed to use the internet, so he couldn't contact Sylvie. And he maintained that he was in a relationship with her, though, that this was real, and once all this jail stuff was behind them and figured out, that they were going to go out and have a cruise. They were just going to go on a cruise after all of this is sorted out, once everybody realized that he was innocent. Mind you, Sylvie said that she could tell he was obsessed with her, but this was her job. They weren't in a relationship. He was not her boyfriend. This wasn't real. Now, in order to pay his bail, he tried to access his parents' life insurance money and was promptly informed, you are in jail as a suspect for killing them, so no, you aren't going to be able to access their life insurance or any of their money. You are cut off from all of that because you are suspected of killing them. So when that didn't work out for him, he then started offering interviews to news outlets in exchange for them paying his bond. He said in letters that he had sent that it was his half-brother Jason's fault for not believing in him and not posting his bond, that he was having to reach out and do interviews with news outlets to get the money. That was also turned down. No news outlet was going to pay his bail for an interview. And most of these letters were just him complaining about everybody being against him and how he was this innocent person and the world was out to get him. He'd done no wrong. Grant never got the bail money, so he stayed in jail until his trial started. But the investigators continued searching the house and the car and any evidence they could find, and they found hundreds of messages between him and Sylvie, along with all the receipts of the money he had spent on her, so they could see the amount of money he had taken from his family in order to pay for this addiction. So his trial finally started on July 15th, and the prosecution's opening statements theorized that with Grant's ultimatum of giving up Sylvie or losing the support from his family, he decided that he wasn't going to give up Sylvie, and instead he was going to get rid of his family so they couldn't interfere anymore. They said just a few hours after killing his entire family, he then used the Wi-Fi at a Publix to contact Sylvie. She never responded, but that was the first thing he wanted to do when he was done, was to reach out to her again. And he waited for her to ask him to come live with her, come be with her. They could be together forever. And she never did. She never responded. She had no interest in this. His trial lasted 2 weeks, and the jury learned everything that had been going on over the past 6 months. All of the money Grant had stolen from various family members, all the items he had stolen to sell, his obsession with a cam girl, the fights with his parents, and the help that they were trying to give him, the support that they were doing, all to keep him out of jail. The prosecution also found the murder weapon, and it belonged to Grant's best friend Blake. Blake was brought in to testify, and he said about 2 weeks before the family died, he realized his gun was missing, and the last person that was in his room and able to access it was Grant. So again, Grant had stolen from somebody who trusted him. On July 31st of 2019, the jury deliberated for a little over 8 hours and came back with a guilty verdict. On August 12th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was it was finally over. He was where he had belonged long ago. If things had just been a little bit different, if he had accepted his consequences, if so many things, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But unfortunately it did. And I thank you for listening to the Amato case. I hope everyone has a great day and stay safe, and I will be talking to you later.